Tenamwari. 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 Mwari Makurukuru. Mwari Makurukuru. Mwari Makurukuru. Kuzai Muzum Makuru. Kuzai Muzum Makuru. Kuzai Muzum Makuru. Tenamwari. 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 Everybody good? Yeah. All right. I know we're behind time here, and I've got characteristically more to get through than I have time to get through it. And I'm going to cut quite a bit. But before I get into the actual message, we are in the institution of Shumira, which was inaugurated, in the month of January 1987, which is just a year and a half after I was born. And every month, since that time until this institution has been in place, and we have gathered for Shumira, because it was understood by the founding mothers and fathers of the Alkebu-Lan revivalist movement that freedom and liberation begins with the freeing of the mind and the soul. And so we have the leadership of the Alkebu-Lan revivalist movement to thank for the fact that we are still here today. And in particular, we have the spiritual leader of the Alkebu-Lan revivalist movement, who also happens to be my father, brother, leader. But can we hail the leadership of Alkebu-Lan and the spiritual leader of the Alkebu-Lan revivalist movement? There's enough to say, but we're not enough time for long introduction, so I'm going to get straight into it, So the title of the message is African History, Spiritual Healing and Warfare. All right. And that's an abbreviation, because if you want to emphasize it, we could say African History, Spiritual Healing and Spiritual Warfare. Right. I took it for granted that you would understand that it's spiritual warfare as well as spiritual healing. Yes. I know when you have a flyer, you have space confinements and all these things. But it's spiritual healing and spiritual warfare. And it's important that we delve into that because we are in the institution of Shumira, in which we reorientate ourselves according to the traditions, the teachings, traditions of our African ancestors. The spiritual teachings and traditions of our African ancestors. But it's also Black History Month. An institution which our African ancestors instituted for a particular purpose. And so every month we find that we have to reorientate ourselves to that purpose because there appears to be a lot of confusion around what them do and why them do it. That's right. You following me? Yeah? And I'm not going to go into the long history today, but we are going to touch on it. And hopefully, because we do this every year, I try to add something new. But hopefully through the message we understand the relationship between spirituality, spiritual systems, and history. All right. And we understand the relationship between history, spirituality, and the African Liberation Fight. Because the teaching of history and our spiritualizing as African people has no meaning or no purpose unless we are engaged in the quest and the mission to liberate ourselves. If we're not doing that, there's no purpose for us to be here. You following me? Come on, pour some libation. For what? What are we calling on the ancestors for? What we want them energy for do? That's right. And if we're not doing nothing, don't call the ancestor. So we're going to begin in a bit of a different place. We're going to draw on the wisdom of the ancestors as encapsulated in the text called the Oduifa, which is the spiritual wisdom of our Yoruba ancestors, which is used for spiritual teaching as well as divination. And we're going to get into the Oduifa according to Oturapu Meji. I love that name. I don't have time to explain the depth of the Odu, but look into that, the Oduifa, all right? And forgive me, because I'm a descendant of Africans who were enslaved in the Caribbean, and therefore my Yoruba is not up to par. So we're gonna. We forgive you. give thanks. Yeah, we give thanks. Yeah, and we're gonna just present the Yoruba. Yeah,
Nice.
you know what I'm saying?
Nice.
For your eyes.
Proper.
Yeah, and you can try to pronounce 2 words.
Yeah, man.
You know what I'm saying? In your mind. And we're gonna read.
Can't
Yes?
read that.
That's right. And we're gonna read, yeah, from the Anglais. Yeah, we're gonna read from the Anglais to get our message started today. Pardon me? No, it's the Anglais. That's the Anglais, yeah.
You read the English, I'll translate to you.
Give thanks. give thanks, Ralida, all right?
Nice.
So the Oduifa, yes, in Otoropun Meji, says, it is the Ethiopian sparrow which builds its own nest and puts its entrance face down in a curve. The nest neither touches the water nor touches the sky, but its entrance points down in a curve. Yeah, listen carefully. This was the teaching of Ifa for Oyepolu, offspring of those who perform the ancestral rites of life. One whose mother left him all alone when he was very young. Thus, when Oyepolu grew up, he did not know all the rights of his ancestors. His life became chaotic. He sought a wife to marry, but could not find one. He did not have even a place he could call home. Then he took his situation under consideration and went to a Babalawo for advice. Babalawo, father of mysteries, priest. He was advised that it was because of his ancestral rights, which he had neglected, that he was in confusion. He was told to go to the graves of his ancestors and to pay homage and ask for guidance. After he had done so, he started to enjoy his life. Such is the wisdom of Muslim Makuda, our great ancestors, say hail to the power of the word. Yeah, we can dispense with the lights, yeah, for the sake of the people inside. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, the projection. All right? So we see, now I want people to understand, this is a ritual text. Are you following me?
Yeah.
When you go to a Babalawo may give you a reading, and this text may be the topic or the subject of the reading. This is a spiritual text. And it's here because oftentimes many African people don't know say we are spiritual texts. Are you following me?
Yeah.
But we can see to call it the Bible is even a misrepresentation. It even diminishes the value of the thing. You following me? You understand what I say?
Yes.
All right. Yeah? So this is ancestral wisdom and ancestral guidance. But you can see the value of the ancestors is enshrined in the teaching.
That's right.
And once you enshrine the value of ancestors, you are enshrining the value of history.
That's right.
History is a spiritual exploration for African people. Because history is the story, the narrative of our ancestors. And in African tradition, the ancestors are sacred.
Yeah. That's right.
There are no African traditions, I've never come across one, that does not venerate ancestorship. We could have Christian little more. We could have Muslim little more. To the extent that we hold onto our ancestral tradition, you will find ancestor veneration among us.
Word song.
All right, let's move on. So let's honor an ancestor who brought us Black History Month.
Yes.
And an elder who brought us Black History Month in the UK. Goes by the name of Achiaba Adayesebo for the UK, and Baba Carter G. Woodson, who initiated a celebration called Negro History Week in the year 1926 in the United States of America. And the reason for which he instituted the celebration and the observance was because, in his own words, the same educational process which inspires the oppressor with the idea that he is everything and has accomplished everything good.
Come on. Come on.
Extinguishes the flame, the spark
Come on.
within the African at the same time,
Come on. Word.
causing us to be ashamed of ourselves.
Word. Come on. Read the word now.
It's important to know not just that he started Black History Month, but why he started Black History Month.
Yeah.
Because we had been divorced from a knowledge of our ancestors.
Word. Come on.
Baba Achiaba Adaye Sebo teaching in a school in the UK, born in Ghana, raised in Nkrumah's Ghana, was a member of the Young African Pioneers under Nkrumah.
That's right. Come on.
The Osajefo. Travels to America to study, learns of the celebration of Black History Month, moves to the UK, is teaching in a school and comes across a colleague who comes to the school one day complaining, upset. Why? Because her son asked her the night before, "Mummy, why can't I be white?" Why did the son, who was named Marcos, given the name after the most eminent prophet and king, Marcus Messiah Garvey, why? Why? When Mummy began to explore where her son had developed this inclination, she began to discover it was the result of the fact that he could not see any achievement from within the African race.
That's right.
It was the product of his education system, miseducation system in this country. Baba Achiaba Adaye Sebo had a live example and experience of what Baba Carter G. Woodson had outlined. The spark within young Marcus had been extinguished because he was taught that everything good and productive was produced by the European. Young Marcus had not yet received the light of his ancestors. So his mind was in a state of confusion.
That's right. Word sound. Bring it down. Bring the word.
We were in that state of confusion because we had been taken through a process called the Maafa. Kiswahili means great disaster, colossal destruction. We're referring to the invasion, the conquest, the enslavement, the colonization, the neo-colonization of Africa and African people. And as a result of that process, when we do the longer version, we go into the fact that the European systematically attacked the knowledge of African history to the point whereby he even contradicted and negated his own ancestors, the Greeks and the Romans, who had a lot of good things to say about African history and African people. They had to, in order to subject African people to slavery and colonialism, had to give us a false misrepresentation of our history.
That's right.
A misrepresentation of our ancestors. And this is the result of this is given expression in one of my favorite books, Decolonizing the African Mind, by Baba Chinwezu. He says, the Europeanized African is a product of the Ma'afa. The Europeanized African is what the European was trying to reduce us to de-Africanize us and Europeanize us so that we suit their purpose as opposed to our own. He says the Europeanized African, for his part, is overwhelmed by the fantastic achievements of industrial civilization. You know what we have right now? Yeah? We have, roads and factory and all them things, the industrial civilization. But having accepted the European propaganda that industrial civilization is the genetic property of its European pioneers, In other words, you have to be culturally European in order to develop yourself economically and industrially. He fails to distinguish industrial civilization as a type from European civilization as an instance of the type.
Yes, come on.
His desire for the former, industrialization, is therefore perverted into a wish to assimilate himself into the latter, European culture, civilization. Obviously, he can't resist European imperialism if he believes Europeans are the sole owners of the paradise of industrial civilization. Or that the European languages, which are colonial languages in Africa, and I might add among African people, are indispensable for participation in industrial civilization. Such veneration of alien cultures leaves the African susceptible to foreign domination.
Come on. Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Come on.
Read that last line again. Such veneration of alien cultures leaves the African susceptible to foreign domination.
That's right.
You've had a very live example of this recently. Had a very significant example of this recently. Does this look familiar to anybody?
Yes, yes.
Does this look familiar to anybody? Fidem Queen dead. Mr. Fidem Queen, not the Queen, but Fidem Queen dead.
That's right.
And she for dead. And as soon as she dead, Britain, the nation of the United Kingdom of Great Britain, goes into a state of mourning, but not only goes into a state of mourning, draws the entire world into their mourning.
That's right. That's right. Come on. Word.
They announce 10 days of mourning in Britain. In Jamaica, we announce 12.
12. More British than the British.
But let us not underestimate what is taking place here. This was the vigil for them Queen.
Yeah.
People lined the streets for days just to come and look on a flag and a box. Day and night. Temperature drop. Rain a fall. Them they outside. I wait to pay respect to Fidem Queen.
Yes. Fidem Queen.
This took place as a part of a series of daily rituals.
Right.
Every single day. From the time she dead to the time she buried, and it's all I go on now, because they're not done yet. Ritual I go on. And every ritual reinforces the British sense of itself.
That's right. That's right.
The principles and values that are associated with being British.
Yes.
And if you look upon it good, they are celebrating and endorsing their wicked colonizer history. And endorsing it.
Listen, children, listen to this. Listen.
And engaging the world
That's right.
In the schools.
in the hyper valorization of Britishness.
That's right.
And the worship of Queen Elizabeth II. What not hear me I say?
Yes.
Me see them drag the whole world. And there you as an African say, we're not in that.
Something wrong with you.
We not celebrate colonize around here. There you.
Enslave us.
The most interesting dynamic around this thing, you know, is the way how the American them ready, armed with the full propaganda to defend the British monarchy.
That's right.
The British monarchy that they fought a revolution to get from under. Any African say anything against the British monarchy, where the boy name? George Washington and all the rest of the slave owner them, yes, they fought to get from under the British monarchy.
That's right.
But if the African says reparations in relation to the British monarchy, the first line of defense is the American political and media system.
That's right. Special relation.
Because why? They know who their ancestors are. They are in tune with their ancestors. And even though the freedom line and the ancestral line did have a little beef, them know when push comes to shove, there is one people. Blood is thicker than water. So even though them separate from the United Kingdom of Great Britain as a colony, what them do is create a new geopolitical entity called the West, which symbolizes their historical and cultural connection to where? Western Europe. And using this geopolitical entity, they dominate world politics and world economics. And we, when we engage in the hyper-valorization of them through their rituals, sanction and endorse their domination over us. That is the power of ritual. And they understand the power of ritual. What if we as African people were as inspired, as impassioned, and as organized around the rituals that reinforce who we are as African people? You know about the question?
Yes, yes.
What if them tell me say African ritual is outdated? It has no application in modern time. Me didn't enjoy the whole of this. You know why? Because I was able to look and say, see there? The people then walk out and march out with a goat in front of them. Yeah? If you see that in West Africa, it's primitive.
That's right.
When you see procession, pomp and pageantry, it's meaningless. But these people who are currently running world politics and economics, this is modern civilization,
That's right. Of course.
are engaged in ritual
Yeah.
on a daily basis. Parliament, ritual. Banking system, ritual. Every day, they engage in ritual. And the ritual reinforces freedom history. We're not going to play the video. It's just there as an example. Because sometimes it might be easy for us to get away from the monarchy. Yeah? It's easy to say, well, the monarchy is a colonizer. But they have other special ways of getting us to buy into their, to fit them identity. And one of them was recently the extent to which many Africans, young Africans in particular, are currently supporting the English football team. And when you look at the dynamics and the argumentation around why so many African young people are enthralled by the inclusion that we are now experiencing in the English football team, it requires us to ignore and negate or forget the historical relationship between ourselves and Britain and England. And if we forget the historical relationship or negate it, we cannot understand the current context. And the current context is, whilst we're celebrating the fact that half the England football team is black, even though they missed a penalty. But that was the ancestors. I tell you, yeah? Even though half the England football team is black, I'm not going to play this video either, but this video looks into the fact that the Nigerian government has been in a campaign, some kind of campaign, a very weak campaign, as far as I'm concerned. For the return of what is popularly referred to as the Benin Bronzes, that Britain stole from the region that is now called Nigeria in the late 1800s when they were colonizing the African continent. They sacked the city of Benin and stole the bronzes, and now they are in museums all over Europe. And the British Minister of Culture in this video said, basically, we're not getting them back, they belong here, so. We don't have to look after it. Yeah? And him say, it belong here, so.
And when it's here, the world can access it.
Yes. Right? And then now we hear say they might go give back the Benin brands to the Nigerian government pan loan. Safety and out order. Pan loan. And we say thank you for giving us access to our hold on, listen carefully. The Benin bronzes are not just works of art, you know. What the message name? African history, spiritual healing, and what? Warfare. The Benin bronzes are ritual artifacts. They were artifacts that were placed on the shrines, the altars of ancestors of the people of Benin. Them know, look on the website for the British Museum. Them tell you straight, these are spiritual artifacts. Them tell you, them know. So our spiritual artifacts are currently being desecrated in this institution. Them thief it. Just over 100 years ago. Not just that. And them know why them thief it. Not just that. Around the same period, the British were at war with the people of what is now called Zimbabwe. At the time, the war, the Chimurenga, the Liberation War, was being led by a mama by the name of Nyahanda. Eventually, she was beheaded by the British. And they took her remains to Britain as a trophy. The remains of Nyahanda are still in Britain right now.
Right, that's right.
For over 100 years, the bones of our warrior mama ancestor is in the possession of the people that colonized us. Spiritual healing and what? Warfare. The teeth of Papa Patrice Lumumba after he was assassinated in the Congo in the year 1961. And they doused his body in acid. They didn't want a trace of him left to go into the earth. His teeth were taken to Belgium. And earlier they said, did they actually get it back? Did they get it back? Only to be returned this year in July. Now the only good thing about the fact that it was in Belgium is that because it's there, we know exactly who killed him.
That's right.
And who was in charge of the process.
That's right.
But think of the indignity. We heard earlier, we're still looking for the bones of Baba Deda Kimati from Kenya. Of the so-called Mau Mau. Yeah? So our disconnect from our ancestors is taking place on many levels. Are you following me, kings and queens? So we get to this point now where we're talking about spiritual healing. What is the function of history in spiritual healing? We're going to return to Baba Chinwezu in the aforementioned book. The possibility of history providing cultural therapy for development has been remarked upon by Joseph Kizerbo, an African historian from Burkina Faso. He says, quote, history can play the same role as the psychoanalyst as long as we don't know how to explain certain events, certain behavior which exists today in the individual and collective planes. We will remain prisoners of our past because we don't understand it. If one doesn't understand his history, even his own private history, he can cultivate complexes. Believing, for example, that one is damned. History allows us to understand who we really are. who we are. If one doesn't know who one is, one can't know what one wants to become. I think that the almost exclusive role of history is to lay this down, this fundamental base for development. That's the role of history. Baba Chimwezi goes on, following this, the line of thought expressed above, I have come to believe that our past, by the tasks it implicitly sets for us, is a compass to our future. That a map of our past is the pathfinder to our destiny. Thus, if we misread the map or consult an incorrect map, we will misdirect our efforts in shaping our future. When we're engaging in this is reading the wrong map. Yeah? This is the wrong map. All right. All right. So the key terminology that I want to draw here is this idea about learning our history, because within the study of our history, there are tasks that are implicitly set for us. Yes? If we understand the work of our ancestors and what they were trying to accomplish, we will find a roadmap for what we need to be doing today. All right? And in the book, Anthropological Prisms by Baba Kwesi Pra, yeah? He speaks to this. He speaks to one of the many impacts of the Ma'afa, yes? Particularly the colonial period on African people. He says, in much the same way, listen carefully, that colonialism created chiefs where they did not exist, anthropologists raise sub-nationalities or sub-ethnicities to the conceptual status of tribes. Yes? And he gives some examples. I'm not going to read the examples. He goes on to say, the theoretical and scientific limitations. Let me explain one thing. Whenever you hear about the demographics of the African continent right about now, what you're going to hear is that Africa is a continent of 54 countries, 3,000 tribes,
That's right. Yeah.
and about half that number in languages. That's what you're going to hear. In this book, Baba Kwesi Pra engages in analysis of where those numbers come from. They come from the work of European colonial anthropologists who don't even have a standard means for justifying their numbers. And their numbers are not based upon an organic, African-centered study of cultural development among African people. Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
He goes on to say, the theoretical and scientific limitations and distortions of this approach have been partially scrutinized by Marquette, who's a French anthropologist, who suggested that study of large units in Africa would be no mean contribution to anthropological theory. What does that mean? We discuss African history and African culture almost exclusively on the colonial concept of tribal level. We forget, so we didn't have a Kemet.
That's right.
Large nations formation. Are you following me?
Yeah.
Forget, so we had a Bakonga Empire. A Ouagadougou, Ghana Empire. Mali, Songhai, Mona Matapa, Kanem Borno. The Mossi. Dahomey. We forget that we have larger nationhood formations whereby Africans from various different so-called tribes were interacting with each other and developing systems of politics and economics with each other that wasn't reliant upon the white man or the white man's concept of tribe.
Come on. Important. That's important.
So now, when we say Pan-Africanism today, people's number one rebuttal is, but that's a foreign concept. Africans relate to each other on the basis of tribes. Why? Because we haven't studied the large units in Africa. Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
He goes on to say, this point cannot be underemphasized. One of the most important challenges facing anthropology in Africa today is to identify optimal cultural units on the basis of which development efforts can be constructed. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read the rest. But note what I just said. Identifying what? Optimal cultural units. Remember, the process of colonialism broke down materially and conceptually our indigenous cultural units.
That's right. Yeah.
And retarded our capacity to develop ourselves according to our own cultural units.
Yes.
Baba Sheikh Anta Diop, who we mentioned earlier, extemporizes, in fact, this whole book, Pre-Colonial Black Africa, is about that subject. And he tells you in the introduction, therefore, in fact, I'm gonna skip that. He says, however, this work is not properly speaking a book of history, but it is an auxiliary tool indispensable to the historian. It indeed affords him a scientific understanding of all the historical facts, hitherto unexplained in that sense, it is a study of African historical sociology. It permits us no longer to be surprised at the stagnation, or rather relative stable equilibrium of pre-colonial African societies. The analysis of their socio-political structures presented in it, allowing us to gauge the what? Stabilizing factors in African society. What am I getting at here? The colonial process fractured us. Once we understand that, the task that that understanding implicitly sets for us is that we must make ourselves whole again. But not only whole according to our vision of history, but whole according to our intentionality for the future. In order to make ourselves whole, we must identify the stabilizing factors within our history and in our culture. The stabilizing factors. He goes on in this book, Civilization of Barbarism. Because of time, I'm going to skip it, but it's very important stuff, all right? Maybe we'll come back to it in the Q&A. So, we're back to our Yoruba ancestors. And a narrative from our Yoruba ancestors, the Orisha, which are the divinities in the Ifa or the Isheshe spiritual system. Yes? I want to give you an example of how Africans enshrine the understanding of what I've just explained in ritual.
Come on.
Most rituals within African culture have a narrative associated with it. Yes? Because ritual drama is a dominant expression among African people. And so in this book, Religion in West Africa, yes, the editor of the book, E.A. Adegbola, yes, has an essay entitled A Historical Study of Yoruba Religion. And he narrates this story of the relationship between Obatala and Shango. As a brief explanation, Obatala is an Orisha that deals with divine law, yes, and purity. Are you following me? Yes? In some narratives, it was a Batala that was charged with the responsibility by Oludumare, the supreme force, for shaping and creating the human physiognomy. Yes? Shango is a divinity associated with fire, thunder, yes, lightning, and all these things. All right? And the narrative says those who are responsible for spreading the Shango cult. So now Shango is not just a divinity. Shango is representative of a group of people among the Yoruba. Are you following me? Would certainly have to contend with the popular Obatala cult, which went back to time immemorial. So the Obatala vibration, I don't like the word cult, yeah?
No, like it.
All right? But you know, anyway, yeah. But the Obatala group, yeah, is more ancient than the Shango group. All right. The time before Oduduwa is the progenitor of the Yoruba, the father. Yes. And expressing the fact of its invincibility, even in the face of an Oduduwa takeover of the land. The contention between Obatala worshippers and the vanguard of the cult of Shango was depicted in later myths and ritual plays. Such myths speak of Obatala and Shango as friends. Listen good. The story is told that Obatala once decided to pay a visit to his friend Shango and insisted on going in spite of oracular predictions of an ill-fated journey. It happened that as he got near his friend's kingdom, he saw his friend's horse, which had escaped, and took it in order to return it to his friend, Shango. Shango's servants, who did not recognize Obatala, took him for a thief. They held him and put him in prison, where he languished for 7 years. During the period, however, Shango's kingdom was struck by climactic misfortunes, which made life in society miserable. When consulted, the oracle pointed to an innocent man languishing in jail. Shango later identified his friend, Obatala, and had him released. Is everybody with me?
Yeah.
So it's depicting political strife between the followers of Obatala and the followers of Shango. That's the long and short of it. Let's go forward. This myth and the ritual plays, note the ritual plays, connected with it, establish the Obatala cult as only one among the others able to assert its lasting quality only through its moral strength. Yes? Particularly loyalty, patience, and long-suffering. If Obatala represents Ile-Ife, which is a city, and Shango represents Oyo, which is a city, and both of those cities represent kingdoms and empires at different points, yeah? The implication of social history and relationships among the Yoruba is clearly that Ile-Ife has to accept being just one among other Yoruba towns, yet having a moral and spiritual influence among all. It is significant that this simple truth has been what? Ritualized. So we see a depiction of political strife and the harmony that is born out of it. And every so often, the Yoruba ritualize this story, this narrative. And in doing so, they reinforce their wholeness. And the lessons from their history. The lessons from their ancestors. I should say the lessons from our ancestors. Now, I know some of you, if you know Shakira, you've been wondering, oh, Shakira gets so long and he don't say Mama remember Annie yet. Yeah? Well, see, yeah? Yeah? I'm on the last leg, right? So we see Mama Marimba Annie. This is here because Mama Marimba has a ritual, yeah, that I was blessed to attend in the year 2019 called Abakosem Sum Sum. Abakosem is historical narrative. Yes? Yeah. Sun Sum is spirit. She translates it as the spirit of history. And she calls it a spiritual political process from praise song to African spiritual warfare onto world African sovereignty. She says the purpose of Abakosem Sum Sum is to make you feel, is not to make you feel comfortable, but to challenge you to grow in African sovereign consciousness. Abakosem Sum Sum will cause you to ask and answer the question, how will I live from this movement forward so that my life brings my people closer to African sovereignty? Just in the same way, yes, that the British government engages the world in rituals that reinforce British sovereignty and imperialism, we need to engage in ritual that reinforces African oneness, African unity, and African liberation.
That's right.
Why is this important? Because, coming back to what was said before about finding our optimal cultural unit for development, our Pan-African ancestors, our universal African nationalist ancestors, chief among them the most eminent prophet and king, His Excellency Marcus Messiah Garvey, understood that in order for us to achieve our liberation, we had to organize on the basis of our optimal cultural, political, and economic unit, which is African. And there is, surprisingly sometimes in today's world, a woeful misunderstanding of that inclination and a significant attack against it. Coming from within the race.
Yes, right.
And even sometimes within the so-called conscious community. People that weaponize division among African people to negate a Pan-African inclination and therefore subvert the agenda of African sovereignty. And so Mama Marimba Ani has an article in this edition of the African World newspaper for 2022 called Choosing to be African. We are African by nature. But in order to liberate ourselves, we have to choose to be African. There's so much I could say this right about now because the battle is hot on this issue at the moment. But because of time, I'm just going to read the words of our spiritual mama and done this. So is that all right, kings and queens? Mama Marimba Annie says that the hardest choice in these times of white supremacy, world domination, is the choice to be African. Yet for us, it is the only choice. It is the best choice. It is what we are and what we must be. As Nana John Henrik Clark says, our story tells us who we are, where we have been, and where we still must go. African identity gives us direction, focus, and will. It is a template for our victory. Choosing to be African prepares us for war. War is not easy. War is not pleasant or safe. And it is lucrative only for the white supremacists, capitalist warmongers. Yeah, she said capitalist warmongers. I'm just pointing that out. We did not choose to come to this place called America, Britain. We did not choose war, but we have been in a war zone ever since we were kidnapped, stolen, and made captives, workers for centuries. We have avoided choosing to be African because we have been in denial of our condition of subservience. The enemy, colonizer, enslavers, white supremacists took us away from ourselves, robbed us of our African beingness. They stole millions of us physically, transported us as cargo and commodities. We became prisoners of war. They forced us into plantation labor camps. They denied us our languages and our belief systems, our drums, our land, and more. They captured our minds in their schools and in their places of worship.
Come on.
She says, but the enemy could not force us to give up our hearts, and our souls. That is our choice. We can still love Africa. We can love who we are. We can choose to be African. That choice gives us wholeness. Choosing to be African is healing. It is the only way to move beyond fear. The only choice that centers us. It gives us a world view, a way of understanding reality. Choosing to be African gives us definition of humanness, of nature, of righteousness, of righteous relationship between African men and African women, community, cooperation, familyhood, sharing, and spirit becomes values in our life. Choosing to be African connects us to our source of power. It rescues us from the sea of confusion which engulfs us as we are trapped in this colonized condition. Knowing that we are African gives us clarity. Choosing to be African mandates the retrieval of our wholeness. So if our history provides us spiritual, psychological therapy, then the material, the conceptual material for that therapy is to be found within our understanding of ourselves as African people and our African culture. And if we are going to be successful in this war, because we are at war.
That's right. Better believe it.
Our capacity for success is going to be based upon the extent to which we can recognize, valorize, harmonize, and actualize our Africanness. And make ourselves whole again. I'm reminded of the words of the most eminent prophet and king, and I'm closed on this, where he says, don't sing the songs of other races. Don't recite the poems of other races. Don't wave them flag.
That's right.
Make of yourselves the highest idealism and then live up to it. 10 9 more brothers and sisters.